For a couple of decades now, there has been talk of Scottish and English football leagues combining in some way. The suggestions for how to do this have come in various guises, such as a British Cup replacing the current League Cup formats that exist either side of the border. In the main, this talk has revolved around the Glasgow Giants, Celtic and Rangers, making the move south, allowing these huge clubs to compete at a higher level and become the global footballing powers that they are capable of being. But for various reasons and good reasons, this has not happened, and while these reasons exist, Scottish football, once a hotbed for European leading clubs and players and managers, is being cut adrift in terms of finance and ability to compete on the field. So the question remains, how can the two nations not just combine their football structures, but do so in a way that benefits the leagues, fans, and the nations themselves? This is a deep dive into why and how the English and Scottish football leagues should combine. A good place to start here is whether Celtic and Rangers would welcome a move into the English Football League in the first place, namely the Premier League. Publicly, the two clubs tend to be coy about wanting this move. While it would prove lucrative, it would be a faux pas to publicly declare their indifference for a Scottish league that they still compete in, knowing that by making this jump or declaring that they want to make this jump, they would diminish the league considerably. Nevertheless, this has not stopped club officials from the old firm doing just that in the past. Ex-chief executive of Rangers, Charles Green, is quoted in the Daily Mirror as saying the following: "Whether it is next week because the English authorities change their mind, or in 5 to 10 years, Rangers and Celtic will leave Scotland. I say to English clubs, don't be afraid of the unknown. There will be cross-border leagues, and that will change the face of European football. The doors are opening." Dermot Desmond, former Celtic owner, said as far back as 2001 that the move south of the border for the old firm was inevitable. And back in 2001, the introduction of Celtic and Rangers may have been more palatable to the English Premier League, if not the Scottish one. While a gap existed back then, it has grown to the point now where shoehorning these clubs into the Premier League seems completely unrealistic. Bear in mind the EFL clubs are receiving between 187 million in TV revenue each year, with their SFL counterparts receiving just 30 million. A quote from Football Scotland says, "It's a huge boost for the lower leagues in England, but does bring further questions on the deal the SPFL made to extend their contract. The broadcasting giants will show up to 60 games per season in the SPFL over the rest of their deal, which is in place until the end of the 2028-29 season and kicks in from the 24-25 season. But Sky Sports have failed to show their full allocation of Scottish games during the last 2 seasons." In this regard, it feels that while there is some truth to the statements of the former owners of the old firm clubs, as the game is shifting, there is a particular boat that may have sailed, as the gap between the two nations' league systems has become so wide from a financial standpoint, this move almost seems untenable. As alluded to before, there is a good reason that this jump was never made, namely that football in Scotland would suffer. While this is true, the nuances of this are generally misunderstood and give us an indication as to how to proceed with attempting to bring new momentum to the Scottish League system. Because of Rangers' demotion from the SPL some years ago now, we can get a pretty accurate forecast on what will happen to SPL gates should the old firm leave. Rangers account for roughly 5% of all home gate receipts in the SPL based on a figure quoted in the Scotsman. However, it is slightly more complicated. Depending on which teams are promoted into the league in any given year and how close these teams are to their rivals also has a bearing on gates over the season. Many clubs actually fared quite well during Rangers' absence from the SPL, with the promotion of Dundee into the league boosting sales and interest in the region north of Glasgow. The teams hit hardest by Rangers' departure during that time were Celtic, who sold 70,000 less tickets than they normally would over the season, Kilmarnock and Motherwell, showing how geography plays a key role here in generating gates, and how local teams and rivalries facilitate regional participation and interest. Also, bear in mind SPL clubs make a greater percentage of revenue from gate receipts than any other top leagues in Europe, 43% as of 2018. However, despite this, trends in Scotland have been showing a reduction in gate receipts for some time. The average total attendance across all 12 SPL clubs in 2001-2002, for example, was 187,901, which by last season had shrunk to 162,064, a drop of almost 14%. This is a timely reminder of the football culture that exists within Scotland and how it needs preserving, and that actually there are larger issues to address. Great clubs exist throughout the country, not just in Glasgow, all with a long and cherished history, from Aberdeen winning the Cup Winners' Cup to Dundee United and Hibs both beating Barcelona. We now have a situation where Celtic and Rangers do not have the financial muscle to compete with EPL clubs, and in turn, non-old firm SPL clubs are unable to make any sort of run at competing for the SPL title. The idea of severing Celtic and Rangers from the Scottish League entirely seems wrong. So then we have the following conundrum. Number one, Celtic and Rangers want to be able to benefit from the finances and opportunities EPL clubs are afforded. 2. Scottish clubs across the board should thrive as a result of any change, which we believe they can, given the right circumstances and competition. And 3. Any changes must cause minimal interference with current English and Scottish Football League structures, and not question their integrity beyond a level that is acceptable to the majority. Now, the way to do this may lie in the Championship playoff structure, reserving a spot for the SPL champions and allow them to compete for a place in the Premier League. This raises several questions, although the 4 key ones are probably: 1. Is it not unfair to move the goalposts on Championship clubs? 2. How does this help Scottish football? 3. What's in it for the EFL? 4. What's in it for the EPL? Let's take these one at a time. Is this unfair on Championship clubs? Well, yes, but perhaps not as much as at first glance. This is a pretty straightforward case to put forward. In the last 10 years, clubs who have finished 6th or the final position of the playoffs in the Championships have not gone on to win promotion. You have to go back to 2010 when Blackpool became the last side to do this. So while this still looks less than appealing to Championship clubs, in real terms, this is probably not as significant as one might think in terms of promotion chances. There is always an argument that this is too disruptive for the English system, or fans of the old firm clubs may feel this is below their status as a club. However, this would be a fair competition and seems like the best trade-off, taking all things into consideration. How does this help Scottish football? This is more nuanced and has a few moving parts. Essentially, we know the Scottish clubs will suffer in gate receipts and other areas of revenue generation if and when one or both of the old firm clubs are promoted into the Premier League. However, the upsides may be enough to counteract this, depending on where you sit. Firstly, the Premier League is in a position, as it does with the Championship, to compensate the SPL for any Scottish teams competing in the Premier League. Let's say, for argument's sake, Celtic go up via this new system. It would be incumbent on the Premier League to compensate SPL clubs for the loss in gate receipts, which we can estimate at something like 5% mentioned earlier per old firm team, although of course this would be subject to debate. Consider, however, how the Premier League is subsidising the EFL in this quote from The Athletic. The Premier League earns almost £3.5 billion a year from its media rights and commercial deals, and While the exact number is hard to pin down, it shares around 500 million or 15% with the English Football League, various community programs and organisations such as the Professional Footballers Association. If we discount the old firm clubs, just 3 teams in the SPL manage over 15,000 fans per match, with the remaining 7 all averaging between 7.5 and 3.5 thousand. If we do a quick math scenario here and say for argument's sake that Celtic were promoted, that would leave an average gate of around 12.5 thousand people. The average price of a ticket is hard to estimate as these change depending on the teams involved, season tickets being issued, etc. But we can assume it's somewhere around £30. There are 228 matches in an SPL season, meaning total gate receipts in an SPL season without Celtic are likely to be somewhere around 85.5 million. 5% of this is 4.275 million, the price of like-for-like compensation on gate receipts lost. In short, this is very doable from a financial standpoint for the Premier League. The question then becomes, why would this be in the EPL's interest? And we will get to that shortly. For each Scottish team that enters the Premier League, the percent of compensation to the SPL would increase, potentially generating more revenue for the Scottish League that would have not happened otherwise. There is perhaps something else at play here. Without both old firm clubs in the SPL in this scenario, there may be an opportunity to spread the money in the Scottish game more evenly. After Rangers were demoted from the SPL, the Scotsman said, "Rangers' likely expulsion from the SPL is the rarest of opportunities to change the status quo, and it should be grabbed with both hands." What this quote alludes to is the Scottish Football Authorities taking advantage of Rangers' absence by sharing gate receipts and TV money more evenly throughout the league so that competition would increase and produce a better product. These motions had not been allowed previously due to the voting power of the old firm clubs, who regularly veto any consensus by the other clubs in the SPL, known as the Gang of 10. There may be an argument here that actually, and rather ironically, the league becomes a better product without the old firm teams in some sense, particularly as all teams have a route to the Premier League. But there is a wider and probably more important point. We can see that Scottish league structure has its own vibrancy, and local clubs and rivalries are the lifeblood. If all of a sudden there is a pathway, however remote, for these clubs to get to the Premier League, that provides new context for all of them. Namely, you are far more investable. In other videos, I have focused on just how much investment there is in English Football League clubs, mainly from the US. A large part of this is because there is a route into the Premier League. If, for example, you were to take a team like Inverness Caledonian Thistle, you were to buy and make a huge investment in the club now, there seems very little incentive for you to do so. With the TV deal currently in place, it makes no business sense to spend a mammoth amount of money over many years to even try and compete with Rangers and Celtic, as even if, and it's a huge if, you were able to win the SPL, the prize money and even Champions League money would be a drop in the ocean for the finance that was required to get there. Why is this? Because they are locked in a TV deal that offers no route to monetisation via this model. Once Scottish clubs have this new route available to them, not only will they be investable, they have great history and stories to tell. We only have to look at Wrexham as an example. But if we look across the level of investment in the lower football leagues of England, we will see this scenario play out more and more. Again, I have done a video on this as to why investors think there is an opportunity here. We can even look at semi-professional league clubs like AFC Croydon Athletic, where Stormzy and Wilfred Zaha have made an investment. But why is this important? Because when you listen to the Wrexham story, Wrexham are getting over the double the gates they used to get now, or even Wilfried Zaha talking about AFC Croydon, it is always about community. While I realise they will be very aware of the PR they are trying to create here, this is in essence true. Great football clubs, both large and small, are at the heart of communities across England and Scotland. With the right investors and narrative, this could ignite old rivalries and new interest across Scotland, mainly because the country has enough of these great old clubs who are ripe for some fresh momentum and interest. A route into the lucrative and most watched league in the world changes perception and brings opportunity, allowing the league system to progress, perhaps even thrive with and without the old firm. What's in it for the English Football League? The EFL has been looking for the best broadcast deal it can get, with a fresh deal with Sky running out now in 2029. As part of this thinking, the league has considered, just as the Premier League has, going direct to consumers, essentially selling the games via its own Netflix-style platform with no middleman. This is likely to happen in the not too distant future, and this kind of model could be helped by the interest that Scottish participation in the playoffs would bring. While the playoffs are already quite popular now, imagine a tie such as Leeds v Celtic to get promotion to the Premier League. This would be as big as nearly any game in the Premier League in its own right, and would likely draw huge attention, perhaps big enough to sell the game as a box office or one-off event. Of course, increased attention bodes well in terms of sponsorship and television rights deals, potentially enabling them to improve revenue via either our direct-to-consumer method or new deals with broadcasters. What's in it for the Premier League? Those of you who have seen my videos before, thanks very much by the way, will know of the crossroads the Premier League finds itself in on a number of issues. The EPL is looking to stave off threats from a European Super League and is also answerable to the heavy US investment that is coming into the English game. Clubs like Celtic, for instance, have huge reach in the US, and by consolidating the league with potential juggernauts such as Rangers and Celtic especially, improves the position of the EPL further, increasing its global reach and avenues of potential investment. Essentially, this would help it fortify its position as the world's best league, leaving slightly less ground for any European Super League to try and swallow up, and leave a bigger gap of revenue and interest to then try and compete with. From this point of view, there is a safety in numbers feel to this sort of move. The EPL is also looking to sell packages to broadcasters for which they will charge a premium. Each TV station, in truth, would air Manchester United or Liverpool nearly every week, as this will nearly always guarantee the highest audience. It is only because rules exist stating a TV network can only air a certain amount of a particular team's games that stops them from doing this. Having more premium teams, for want of a better word, with huge fan bases will be attractive to the Premier League, as essentially it will help them sell the broadcast packages for more money. One last thing to consider here is that the huge money involved in the Premier League has made leagues within leagues. Although it is not fashionable to say so, the Premier League runs a slight risk of becoming stale. Much like in the French rugby union system, where the top leagues subsidised leagues below it, longer-term thinking at the EPL should encourage thriving leagues beneath it. This all adds to the quality of the product, which finally is key to the ongoing success of the league. Despite all this, it may well be that fans would want no part in connecting the two football leagues, or prefer that the structures remain isolated from each other, with good reason. Despite the money and opportunity, there are reasons to be wary of the Premier League and all that this brings. For others, however, this may present an opportunity not just for the clubs themselves, but for wider communities and areas in Scotland, and dare I say it, for the countries themselves, who, despite the turbulence of the last years, remain side by side and key to each other's prosperity. Football is one of the ways, perhaps even one of the best ways, of moving us all forward towards the future that awaits. Thank you very much for getting to the end of this video, and thanks to those who have commented and liked on on this video and other videos. I will be back again with another one soon. So thanks again.